People talked about being an alpha male as just this, it's just pure strength. It's just purely about being intimidating and aggressive. And then you get to reap all these benefits. You get to be the king of the hill, the top of the heap, whatever. You get to be Frank Sinatra, evidently, by the way. I just chose those words from his song off the top of my head. All right, welcome to the January 29th Blizzard edition of the Year of Living Manly. I've been out here shoveling snow. We've got about a foot. We're supposed to get it maybe another foot. It is everything we were promised and more, but I'm about to go in and get warm and answer the question I teased last week, which is, are alpha males masculine? Or put differently, are very masculine men alpha males? I promised last week I'd have some important things to say about this, and I do. I've got it all queued up and ready to go. But just to make this a little more interesting, I will Q&A with myself from this position in the snow, blizzard conditions. Yes, indeed. I am here to answer this really big question today. It's going to be exciting and might stretch out into 2 videos. We'll see how it plays out. But first of all, let's wrestle with this big question. James, I'm told by reliable sources that there's no such thing as alpha males. True or false? Very good question indeed. Thank you for asking. So I'll put my hot cocoa aside here. So hi everybody, I'm James McQuivey. This is the Year of Living Manly, a project that I initiated just purely because I want to explore what it means to be masculine today. I'm going to wrestle with the question of what it means to be alpha male and what it means to be very masculine, and whether these things are the same or not. This is going to be a really good answer, a valuable answer, but we have to start, first of all, by understanding why some people out there don't want you to believe that alpha male is a thing. It's because it's really a reaction to kind of the cultural movement of an earlier period where people were sort of glorifying alpha masculinity without actually knowing what in the world that is. As a backlash to some of that, people have thought, well, we need to downplay the idea that humans have any alpha male characteristics because otherwise we're glorifying the kind of negative aggression that we fear, plagues masculinity, that men suffer from, and that causes men problems. So very much like the whole conversation I'm having this year about masculinity, there's this suspicious notion that out there's a world of masculinity, a threshold of masculinity past which you go, where you start doing harm, you create problems, and you're bad, and you're toxic, and if you think yourself as an alpha male, then you're definitely in that category, whatever. I'm here to resolve this 100% very clearly. In nature, alpha males exist. Okay, so you're going to tell me that alpha males exist, but aren't alpha males bad? And that's exactly the issue. It's not that alpha males in humans are bad or good. We're going to learn all of that. We're going to figure all of that out in the conversation. We have to basically do this conversation in 2 parts. We'll do the first part, which will be an exploration of what alpha male really means in nature. And then the second part will explain what that means for human nature. So let's start. I'll take another sip of my wonderful hazelnut flavored hot cocoa here, and then we will jump right into part 1. What is an alpha male? The conversation, part 1, what is an alpha male? Now, this is really, really important, and I don't know how far back to go on this. I don't know what assumptions to bring to our conversation together, but I'll go back quite a ways. So just understand that there's something called sexual dimorphism. For the vast numbers of sexually reproducing species on our planet, sexual dimorphism emerges when the males and the females of this species, in pursuit of reproductive opportunities, differentiate. That is, they become different from one another, both internally, externally, and in their behaviors. An easy example of this is the very famous role of the male feathers in the peacock display. So a peacock is an interesting animal because it's very, very invested in producing these very expensive in terms of the resources it takes to produce these feathers that make for a peacock display. But at the same time, they're incredibly accurate signals to the female about their fitness. So I'm parasite free, that I could grow these feathers without problems. I have good genetic material and that my feathers are beautiful, multicolored, and very evenly dispersed. And I know how to keep myself safe and healthy enough that these feathers are still intact. Look at me go. So that, sexual dimorphism can result in all sorts of dynamics of how the male and the female in the species end up connecting with each other to reproduce. What we're getting to here today, though, is the specific concept of species that rely on an alpha male in order to determine who gets access to what reproductive resources. And I say rely on because that's going to be a crucial differentiator in whether or not we as humans actually have alpha males. Is going to be that question. I'll shelve that for later. We'll save it for later. Let's start, though, with this very fundamental question of what is the spectrum of alpha dominance and who sits where on that spectrum. I'm going to start off with just an acknowledgement that in many, many species, what happens shy of alpha male behaviors is we end up with something that simply is just called a dominance hierarchy. A dominance hierarchy usually indicates males of the species who are physically stronger, often larger in size, faster in their movements, who are able to dominate other males and therefore corner the market on reproductive resources and reproductive outcomes just because of their sheer aggression, their sheer power, their sheer strength, size, all of those things in combination. Depends on the species. I'm going to give you an easy example of that. It's going to be the giant cuttlefish. Cuttlefish are cephalopods. They fit in the same category as squid and octopuses, and cuttlefish are remarkable animals. Some of the same characteristics, very high intelligence, similar to squid and octopus. But instead of sort of using their appendages, their tentacles, in order to swim, they use them mostly to grab things and touch things. And instead they have these beautiful body-length fins along their torso that they use to swim. And they also have the ability to camouflage and change their colors. It's just a fascinating animal if you're not familiar with it. Anyway, the reason I'm talking to you about the cuttlefish is the cuttlefish has basically one primary reproductive strategy. The cuttlefish only lasts for about a year in the ocean. They die shortly after a year of life, and at the end of that life, all the cuttlefish of a particular species, and the one I'm referring to is the giant cuttlefish, and this will be off the coast of Australia. All the giant cuttlefish will come to the same place, and there will just be hundreds and I guess thousands of them all ready over the same couple of period of days to mate. And the winners of the mating contest are going to be the biggest and the strongest males. And what will happen is the females will congregate, the large males will find a female that they're interested in and will sort of hover around them and over them and protect them and keep them from intrusion by any other males in the process. Now, there's some other wrinkles to that are fascinating that maybe I'll bring out in a future video. But the way to think of what's happening here is biggest cuttlefish wins. There are a couple of sneaky ways for smaller cuttlefish to try and get in on the action, but generally it means that the smaller cuttlefish have to pick less desirable females. So the bigger cuttlefish get the best in terms of reproductive fitness females, and they're off to the races. So after the period of mating is over, the females are fertilized, they take the eggs, they deposit them, and then they die. And the males die shortly thereafter. So is this an alpha male? Now, I use this example because it's a really clear example. The answer is no. Why is it a no? This is essentially a dominance hierarchy where males are dominant based on certain characteristics, usually related to growth, strength, size, speed, so on. All it does is indicate who is dominant in the hierarchy of access to resources. This is not the definition of alpha male that we will get to later. So I'm going to try to use my hands to indicate we're way over here now when we're talking the giant cuttlefish. We're going to move a little bit closer and closer before we get to what an alpha male is, and then we're going to ask, where do humans sit on this scale? So moving from cuttlefish, where a dominance hierarchy is clearly in place, we're going to move now to red deer. Red deer, found all throughout Europe and some of the largest mammals in northern Europe, and in actually the British Isles, the largest mammal. Beautiful deer. These are the ones that you see with just these incredible, impressive racks of horns, and they'll have this wonderful sort of beautiful fur that seems to grow on the horns at certain times of the year. Now, it's the males, of course, that are growing the horns, and these males engage in these behaviors that are just so classic to what we might imagine alpha males are. And I'm gonna tell you, we're still on this side of the scale. We are not in alpha male territory yet. But why not? How is that possible? Because red deer have these incredible reproductive patterns where the strongest, fittest males own the reproductive opportunities available from very large groups of what are called harems of females, or hinds is the name for the stags for the males and the hinds for the females. And in this relationship, it would be very easy to say, classic alpha, here it goes. He's got the largest horn rack, he's the strongest, he bellows the loudest and the longest during the mating period, which signals to everyone around that he's not to be messed with. And if you do go read more about that, I'll try to include links to all of these references below so that you've got access to resources you can pursue. And I recommend you do. Fascinating stuff. But the red deer, what makes red deer so fascinating is that they do that classic battle of, two men, one's males, one's dominant, one wants to challenge the dominance of the other. They have a whole set of rituals that they are instinctively able to follow in order to figure out who is going to remain in charge of this harem of 10, 12 females, as much as 20 females in some cases. And so as a result, most of these stags don't want to actually fight, but they do need to be prepared to fight in order to achieve or maintain dominance. And that's exactly what's happening here. This is dominance. We're not yet in the category of alpha male for this one reason. When that mating season is over and that male who wins has had a chance to attempt fertilization with 8, 10, 12 of the females while fending off the other males who might try to sneak in, they then go their separate ways. The females go into all female groups, the males go into all male groups, and they don't reassemble in this particular configuration until the next September, when it starts to get cold again and it becomes time for the rut, or the mating season. So why am I using this as a crucial point for distinguishing between alpha males and just pure dominance hierarchy? Because when you'll see, we're going to do 2 more species of animal, you're going to see that these other animals, the weight and burden of being an alpha male is simply much higher than it is for this simple version of a dominance hierarchy winner who gets, yes, preferred access to resources, food, and mating opportunities for being an alpha male, but then doesn't really have much more responsibility outside of the mating season. I go all the way back to the cuttlefish, no responsibility to the community. They're all going to die anyway in a couple of weeks. The stag, they're all going to disband a couple of weeks later, so there's really no investment that he's making in his community. We're going to go next to the rat. Maybe not the animal you most wanted to talk about or envision, except for those of you who are diehard rat fans. But rats, actually now we're getting into alpha territory. And when you read the scientific literature that studies rat behaviors, you will see that they are often, the males, the most aggressive, strongest, fastest males are referred to as alpha males. Why are they alpha males and the stags from the red deer are not? It's purely because even though a rat is only going to live a year or 2 maximum, especially in the wild, which is more similar to the lifespan of a cuttlefish, that rat only living for 1 or 2 years is going to preside over potentially 6, 7, or even more fertility cycles for the females in his group. And as a result, he's going to be a great grandfather before he gets deposed as the alpha rat in the pack. So what you have to understand is that now the burden and the benefit of being an alpha male take on a completely different shade. And that's why I put them on this side of the scale. Over here, it's mostly benefit. And if there are efforts that you have to make, they're short-term efforts. And I'll fight a couple of males off in order to have reproductive opportunities. But if we're talking rats, now we're talking about a male alpha rat who has to commit to, I'm going to take care of this group. And that usually means new behaviors. They have to be the first one to experience the danger that might harm the group. They have to watch over and care for and try to provide for the safety and nutrition of their group, even though membership in their group can come and go depending depending as their different offspring age. So rats are referred to as alphas purely because they now evince this social behavior. And that's what's the difference between simply participating in a dominance hierarchy and being socially minded as an alpha. And this is actually an important part of the whole alpha discourse, because there was a time when people started talking, as I mentioned before, people talked about being an alpha male as just this, it's just pure strength. It's just purely about being intimidating and aggressive. And then you get to reap all these benefits. You get to be the king of the hill, the top of the heap, whatever. You get to be Frank Sinatra, evidently, by the way. I just chose those words from his song off the top of my head. But you get to be all those things, but it's not. It's not about that. And that's why people have misunderstood alpha for all these years. Being an alpha, the differentiator is now you are willing to invest in your community. You are willing to be a contributor, a protector, and a guide. And here's what's interesting, is we're going to now move to the primate kingdom. Primates all the way to this side. Now, very important that I disclose, not all primates have alpha males as part of their social structure, but many, many do. And they're studied very extensively. They've been studied for decades at a time. Some of the longest running alpha male reigns, if you want to call them that, 20 years long in the gorilla world, which we'll get to in just a second. They've been studied so thoroughly that we know so much about them, including like what % of the offspring of a particular group were sired by the alpha male versus the other males that might be in the troop from time to time. All of that detail, it's fascinating. But we're also going to get into very interesting behaviors where the most alpha males, the societies of males, or societies of these species that depend on alpha males in order to survive as a group, those alpha males also carry the highest burden of being the alpha male. They have to do the most work. And all the work that has been observed is work that ranges from obviously protecting the group against outside danger, but it's also just leadership. So we're seeing that the alpha male is the one that decides where the group's going to go next to forage for food, how they're going to set up their camp, and how they're going to bed down for the night. They take a lead in all of those decisions, and everyone defers to them in very ritualistic ways, not unlike the red deer, where they have certain practices that they use to determine who is the alpha in the case of, say, gorillas. Just an interesting side note here. So I'll put some links below in the resources and on my Substack. But what you'll see is that the studies that have been done on some of these groups, so we're going to talk about chimpanzees, capuchin monkeys, and gorillas. These three are some of the ones that have the most defined alpha organization. And in a situation like that, you're looking at the capuchin, for example, and there's a Professor Jack, who I'll put her links below as well, who's been studying capuchin monkeys over long periods of time and has just learned some fascinating things about them, including happening to be observing at one point when there was a sickness that took out the top 4 monkeys, because there's always a pecking order in these societies, took out the top 4. And so the 5th monkey, who was not expecting to be alpha male ever, much less anytime soon, suddenly became the alpha. And how did he know he was the alpha? All the females flocked to him and just followed him around, waiting for him to take his leadership role. And for a few days, it appeared to, in her words, freak him out. He didn't know what to do, and he kept trying to avoid them. But it turned out they needed him to step up and fulfill that role. That's how crucial that role of alpha is to their group success. And that's what you're going to see in any of these societies. You're going to see in these social groupings of animals that depend on alpha male roles to survive, is that they need that role to be fulfilled. Let's go back to the gorillas. So the gorillas, this is the category that maybe you've heard of, the silverback males. The silverback doesn't necessarily indicate that they are the alpha. It's just an indication of their strength and their maturity and their age, that they develop this silver hair on their backs. Beautiful animals, of course, and so incredible what we learned about them. You'll see viral videos online of some of these males in captivity who are just incredibly playful with the offspring. Now, one of the things we know about primates is that humans are the only of the primate family where males engage with young at all. In every other primate species, I don't think I'm exaggerating there, there's really no interaction between the males and the offspring. That's a female thing. And so by contrast, humans are incredibly, well, we're variable, but we're incredibly much more investing in offspring as males. And as I shared before, very masculine men, as measured in my survey of the United States, engage with their children to a higher degree. So than average humans do, which is way more than all primates do. Anyway, the one exception to that is alpha male gorillas. Alpha male gorillas play with the young. Now, they don't necessarily care for them. They don't really provide for them, but they will play with them. And in some cases, it's apparent that they're playing with the young deliberately so that they're seen playing with the young, so that the rest of the troop knows I'm the one who's in charge and I'm taking care of even the little ones here. There's even a direct comparison to be made between sort of electoral politicking, where politicians go get babies and hold them up. Like, look, I'm holding a baby. I'm going to take care of the little ones if I get elected. And it's almost the same that the alpha gorillas do the same. So I do this. I lay out these 4 species just to create this spectrum across which we can see that dominance hierarchy is in effect across the whole thing. The difference is that we only get alpha once we get to the point where the male not only gets the benefits of being dominant, but also has the responsibilities that go from being dominant. And the more to the right you are as a species, all the way to the gorilla side, the weight, the burden of that is significant, such that in some of these primates, they've actually measured the levels of stress hormone that the different males go through. And the further down the pecking order you are as a male, the higher the stress levels, or the higher levels of stress hormone you have in your body, except for the alpha male, who has the highest level. So it's like very, very stressful to be the alpha. Being the beta, not stressful at all. You know exactly what to do. You know who's in charge. You just do what you're supposed to do. And then it gets more stressful as you get to the bottom of the pecking order, because you're being left out of a lot of things. You don't have easy access to food and probably zero access to reproductive opportunities. So it's hard to be an alpha all the way to this side of the spectrum. Now, I'm setting up this spectrum for a reason. So it sounds like the big question is this: are human males who have alpha characteristics the good ones or the bad ones? All right, it looks cold out there, James. Thanks for that important question. Sets me up perfectly. Surprise. So this is where I'm going to set up this spectrum in order to say that alpha males in human society, the more alpha they are, the more they take on the responsibility, the burden, the obligation of being alpha. And that males that don't do that, but still evidence alpha behaviors, well, those are the ones I recommend you watch out for. Now, let me explain how I got to that result. So in my survey, which I conducted among more than 1,500 adults in the United States in March of 2021, I was able to find that 41% of men in the United States see themselves as very masculine. On a scale of 1 to 5, they are 5s on that scale. And this whole project is inspired by me trying to understand why I've thought all of my life that being a 4 was optimal. Turns out that being a 5 is optimal. These people do more for society as very masculine men than those of us 4s do. Now, I'm a very good 4, I like to believe, but I want to be a better whatever I am. And so this year, I'm tackling the question of how to be more of a 5. But if that means that someone says, oh, you're about to risk being bad, you're about to risk being toxic or an alpha male and all the bad things that we believe about those words. So, of course, I want to see what the boundaries of being a 5 out of 5 are. And that's part of what inspired this question of alpha males. If I have set out this scale of mere dominance on the one hand and then alpha male behavior on this hand, it's because I want to see if I can measure that scale in humans using my survey. How do we capture some of the core aspects of being an alpha, maybe even just being dominant, somewhere in the middle on that spectrum? That means, first of all, we have to look at sexual behavior. One of the key elements of alpha males in nature is that they tend to reproduce with multiple females. And so I had to find in my survey proxies for that. There's a very easy one, which is how many sexual partners has someone had, which I measured in my survey. But I also wanted to capture whether they have a predisposition for that, assuming that multiple partners would mean less personal commitment or more of an orientation towards casual sexual relationships. So I measured those two things, how many partners someone has had, and I added it together with whether someone has an interest in or a willingness to engage in multiple casual relationships. So that's one piece of how I'm measuring alpha to be consistent with nature. The second piece that I measured is this attitudinal disposition. So I have this great item in my survey, which is I like a good fight. I'm hoping that me using this proxy of I like a good fight is a good way to say, it's someone who wouldn't shy away from conflict at a minimum. So I took that, and then I added it with two personality characteristics that I let people indicate whether they think describe them or not from a larger list. And on my list, I had words like dominant, and then another word was competitive. To see yourself as alpha, you would have to say, yes, I'm dominant. And then you'd have to be competitive. You can't just say, I'm better than everyone else, but I'm unwilling to prove it. You'd have to say, I'm better than everyone else, and I'm willing to prove it. Now, that's not literally what they're saying by saying these statements. So, but grant me some poetic license there as I describe the 5 things that I added together to make my scale of alpha measurement. Now, what you'll notice is they left off all the good stuff. I left off all of those positive outcomes, the leadership, the self-sacrifice, the taking the risks on behalf of the group. And I've talked about some of those things in prior videos, and I'll talk about them again. But I wanted to just say, I don't want to stack the deck too much. I don't want to say alpha means what I think it means. It's all the way over here on the right side of my scale and nothing in between. No, I really wanted to just capture in nature, there seem to be species where the males get the most reproductive opportunities, have the most aggression, and are most willing to not back down from a fight or from conflict. So I just took that, and then said, let's see how that adds up. And that's where it starts to get interesting, and that's where I'm going to jump back to my data to explain. First, I'll share with you the actual parameters of the scale that I created. I don't know that most of you will care, but for those that do, the resulting scale, 5 items on a 5-point scale, gives me a total of 25 points that you can earn. And you can see the shape. It's more or less conforming to a natural curve. There's not enough variation in there that we could get a nice little tail on either side, but you do start to see a tail starting to form on the right-hand side. And what you're going to see here is I have to pick a point along this scale at which I'm going to say, okay, these are the people I'm going to consider leaning alpha. And I'm going to refer to this as the leans alpha scale, because I'm not saying that these people are alpha. But I am saying that if you're going to find someone who is acting alpha in the physical world, it means that they probably score in this subgroup that I'm going to talk about as leaning alpha. Now, because of the way that curve tails off to the right, it's also possible that the most alpha males are the most visible. But let's just talk about lean alpha for now. And I'm going to arbitrarily cut it off at about 1/4 of the respondents. So just going to draw a line there at about the number 17 and say, all right, 1/4 of people scored above 17 on James's scale, and now we need to see what we can learn about their distribution in the population. So a couple of things to first make you aware of. All right. Yes, very masculine men lean far more alpha than everybody else. And remember, the lean alpha scale that I have is not about all the good stuff that alphas have to do and the responsibilities that they bear like gorillas do. I'm just talking about the reproductive access and the aggressive style, let's call it. And yeah, very masculine men. So if we start with the total, as I said, I'd take about 1/4 of people scoring high. It's about 24% that score above 17 on my scale. And then we look at women, 15% of women lean alpha, meaning that they have some of these same behaviors, preferences, attitudes, ways that they would describe themselves as dominant, describe themselves as competitive, and so on. So just remember, there are characteristics that are common to humanity, even if one sex shows them more than others or experiences them more at a higher frequency than the other one does. So this is one of those things. So women are much less likely to have these behaviors and these attitudes. When we now look at all other men, meaning the ones that don't score 5 out of 5 on my masculinity scale, it's 27%. Now we've seen this before, that in these numbers very often women are on one side, all other men are somewhere close to the middle, 27 and 24, very close. And then you're going to see very masculine go beyond that. And they do. 43% of very masculine men lean alpha. And this is a significant difference. I mean, 43% and 27% is not only statistically significant, which I did measure, it's also socially significant. It means that these men, the traits that make them very masculine are traits that are essentially correlated with these alpha animal behaviors and tendencies. And that's important to point out. I keep talking about very masculine men as if they're some kind of magical resource. They're not. They do have a lot to offer, but it doesn't mean that they can't also engage in behaviors that other people will find annoying. And some of this you can find annoying. But what I want to say here, and this is going to be a little subtle, but if I can make this point. Remember that I've said that very masculine men are 41% of men. That means that 59% of men are in this all other men category. So I'm going to do some math here just so that you can follow me. You don't need to follow the math. I think you'll get the outcome. If very masculine men are 41% of men and 43% of them also lean alpha, meanwhile all other men are 59% of men, and 27% of them score high on an alpha scale. So, true, very masculine men are way more likely to lean alpha than all other men. But when you take those disproportionate numbers and you do the math, you're going to see that actually, and here's the way I want to describe this, you'll see it in the next graph and I'll explain it. Actually, when you meet an alpha-leaning male, it's 50-50 whether he's a good one. Now, this might be unfair of me, but I want to point out that yes, the very masculine men define as more likely to lean alpha, but they also define as all the positive things that I keep talking about, and I will keep talking about this year. So essentially what I'm saying is this. When you run into a male who demonstrates alpha-leaning characteristics, I don't want you to say, oh, that's an alpha male, and that's either good or that's bad. I want you to say, 50-50 chance he's also a very masculine man, and that will bring with it all kinds of positive benefits. Or he's not a very masculine man, but still leans alpha, and he may bring along with it fewer of those positive benefits, the leadership, the generosity, the protection instinct that is so fully expressed among very masculine men. So a man who's very masculine, not only when he expresses an alpha lean, also expresses these other things at a higher rate than the men who are less masculine but lean alpha. So if you get me, what I'm going to do here is fill in a pie chart. We're going to look at the whole population. There's this big chunk, 3/4, that are non-alpha males and females. I'll just leave them out for a minute here. 8% of the total population are females that lean alpha. So females are significantly less likely to lean alpha. You saw that before in the prior chart. But they are half the population. So they make up about 8% of the total population are females that lean alpha. Another 8% are this all other men category who are not very masculine in their own opinion, but still lean alpha. And then 9% are the very masculine men who also lean alpha. That 9% versus 8%, that's that 50-50 split I'm talking about. So you run into someone, let's imagine someone describes a friend but doesn't tell you whether it's male or female, and the things that they start to describe, you're like, large number of sexual partners, large in their lifespan, maybe not currently, and also very interested in being aggressive and dominant and likes a good fight, doesn't shrink from conflict. You basically have a 1 out of 3 chance it is a woman, a low masculinity male, or a very masculine male. Then when someone starts to fill in the other details, this person is also faithfully married, which was the topic of last week's video. that already automatically makes it much more likely that you're talking about the very masculine men. Oh, they also engage in these other behaviors. You start to see whether they have the protection instinct, the generosity. I won't show it here. I'll show it for a future discussion on generosity itself. But very masculine men are among the absolute highest givers of their time and their money to charity. So there's so much that comes with being very masculine that basically, and this is where I want you to think of it, if you score high on alpha and you score high on masculinity and those two things connect in the middle, that's good. That means you're going to be someone who's very driven to do the right thing, to build your community and to protect your family. If, however, you are someone who leans alpha and just doesn't have so much of that masculinity, it means that you haven't stepped up to accept the burden of being a guerrilla-style alpha. You're trying to get away with being less of that, less alpha. Even though you might see all these guys on YouTube talking about, you got to be an alpha, you got to be cool, you got to win the ladies or whatever they say these days. None of that actually describes the real alpha, the alpha that the gorillas, interestingly enough, teach us alpha can be. And that's a man who, yes, has all of these desires and urges, but uses them to serve the community. Now, I'm not an alpha myself. I lean very low on this, purely for the sexual behaviors, but also I don't see myself as dominant. And I don't really like a good fight, so I'm low on alpha. The good news for me is that you can still be very masculine. Remember, 57% of very masculine men are not alpha leaning. So I'm comfortable there. I don't have to lean alpha in order to also be a very masculine man. And that's good because we need the variety of men that are able to contribute. And I don't need to wish that I could be in charge of where everyone's going to sleep for the night and hunt the next day. I can still be a valuable contributor to our culture. And that's really part of this exercise for me, is detraining myself from thinking that masculinity means one thing. I can be very masculine and not be those things. And that's just fine. And I don't mean just fine as in it's okay, you can still feel good about yourself. None of this gets into whether or not you do feel good about yourself. This is just about whether you're able to contribute in a way that very masculine men contribute, which is so much and which we need so much. All right, thanks so much. Back out to you, James, out there in the blizzard. All right, James, thanks for braving the blizzard to bring us these truths. Very excited to hear what you're going to tell us next week. What is it going to be? Oh, right. Thank you so much. I forgot. I got to tee up for next week. I'm going to start tackling the topic of sports, and I need your help. I'll be posting on this probably throughout the week. I need some advice. I need to follow a professional or I guess college sports team. I live in Boston, so it's kind of easy for me to pick. I could follow the Red Sox, and I probably will. But maybe in addition to the Red Sox, who out there do you think I should follow so that I can learn what it is that masculine men seem to like so much about team sports and affiliating with a team? Getting all the snow on me. All right.